Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian. Welcome back to the channel, Ian the Reader. Today I have my October 2024 wrap up for you all. I read 19 books in October, a bit of a mixed bag overall, though I did find some really great books in there as well. But yeah, I participated in the Dark Tower Readathon hosted by Jake and Stacey on the Bookish Drummer Discord, which I'll leave linked down below. It was a blast as always. We'll be having our next readathon probably in April of 2025, so you'll definitely want to participate in that. But that's not what this video is about. I wanted to talk to you guys about the 19 books that I read, and yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. Before we do though, let me know in the comments what your favorite book of October was. I'm looking for some good books to finish off the year with, so I could use some more recommendations. Okay, the first book that I read was Desperation, and I'll go ahead and throw The Regulators in there as well. This is by Stephen King / Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King, but I was wanting to read these books for a while, and I buddy read it with some people over on the Bookish Drummer Discord. And unfortunately, this was a pretty mixed bag situation overall. I think I rated Desperation a 3-star and The Regulators a 3.5 star. So the interesting thing about this book, and really the main draw of this book, because I will say the idea of it was more interesting to me than the execution. But anyway, the idea behind this is you have two stories, Desperation and The Regulators, that are featuring the same characters, but in kind of like an alternate universe type of situation where they're in completely different plots. But same characters, sort of, with a little bit of varied backstories, but same names, in similar towns, but with very, very different circumstances and plots that take place. And I thought that idea was really interesting, and so I was very curious to see how I would feel about the two books in comparison to each other, and unfortunately, I wasn't crazy about either of them. Desperation is more of a everything's already gone wrong in this town, and people keep coming into the town and entering into this situation that has already gone haywire, and there's kind of this morally corrupt sheriff that is running things, and there's more going on there that you find out as you get into it, but it's just these people keep meeting this situation and things go from there. While with The Regulators, you kind of see the unraveling of this neighborhood, this city, as corrupt influences kind of come in. And ultimately, like I said, I didn't really have a great time with either of them. If I had to pick my favorite, I'd say The Regulators. I loved the beginning of Desperation. I thought it was a really strong opening, but it was too long. Far too long. I was so bored by a good portion of this, unfortunately. This was just not my cup of tea. The Regulators was definitely better paced, and I will say it was definitely shorter, which made me happy. But overall, I found the characters not to be super, super compelling. And so overall, these books are very middle of the road Stephen King for me. Not by any means my least favorite King that I've read, but unfortunately not anywhere near the top as well. Next, we'll go ahead and talk about all the books that I read for Jake and Stacey Choose My TBR Part 2. Those being What Have You Done by Sherry Lapina, Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, and The Whisper Man by Alex North. So all of these were part of that challenge. They picked 3 books each or 4 books each for me to read that were mystery thriller / horror books. If you want to hear all of my thoughts on that, you can check the link down below for the result video of that challenge. But overall, these were all pretty great. What Have You Done by Sherry Lapina, we'll start there. I really enjoyed the first like 80% of this book. Unfortunately, the ending fell a bit flat for me. At the end, I was just like, that's it? Okay. On top of that, there was one choice that the author made as far as the narration of the book that unfortunately I wanted to go in a bit further of a direction, if that makes any sense. I wanted to go a little bit further, and it just didn't, and so I found myself asking, like, what was the point of that? So overall, the ending ruined this book for me. I would have given it maybe a 4.5 star before that, but unfortunately it ended up being, I want to say, a 3.5 star. I think that's what I ended up giving it. Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey was one of Jake's picks, and I loved this book. It got a 4.5 star from me. I really enjoyed it. We have a protagonist, young woman, maybe not young, but like she's in her 30s, I want to say, and she's coming home to her hometown, her house that her father built, where her mother is dying, and it's confronting all the stuff from her past where some shady stuff happened with her dad, and we find out about all of that and a bunch of other stuff throughout the book. I don't want to tell you too much about the story, but I do highly recommend it. The Goodreads average for this one is pretty low, comparatively, but I recommend it anyway. It's Jake's favorite book of the year. It's not my favorite book of the year, but it was my favorite book of the TBR challenge that they did. I found it really compelling. There's some choices the author makes that are either going to work for you or won't, and they worked for me completely. So really great, pretty short as well. So if you're looking for a horror book, kind of like a creepy atmosphere stuff going on, I don't want to tell you what's going on because it's spoilery. Just read this if you like horror. Just do it. Lastly, on those, I read The Whisper Man by Alex North. This one was pretty good for me as well. I didn't find the plot super compelling for the first half of it, but there were some interesting family dynamics that came into play around the halfway point that I was totally in for. If you want to know anything about my reading tastes, I love books that center on like father-son dynamics as well as complicated family relationships. I love it. I was totally in for that. This follows a serial killer situation where a serial killer was killing children at like 20 years ago. They were apprehended, put into prison, and now somebody else is doing the same thing, leaving kind of like the same calling card type of situation. So they're trying to figure out, do we have the wrong killer? Is this a copycat? What's happening? And I loved a lot of this book. I will say, like I said, the first half was a bit slower for me. There were just a lot of different characters and things going on that I wasn't immediately hooked by, but the halfway point is where things really kicked it into high gear for me, and I really love the ending of this book as well. So recommend this one. Next, I don't have a whole lot to say about this book, but I did read All These Worlds, which is book 3 in the Bobaverse series, just continuing to feel okay about these books. I think they're kind of fun. They're sci-fi, like hard sci-fi, set in the future where people can have their brain scanned and basically make copies of themselves. And we follow a character named Bob who has done such. And there are intergalactic shenanigans that are afoot. And overall, I'm continuing to casually enjoy these books. I really don't have anything to say about them, though. If this sounds like it's up your alley, it's pretty lighthearted for the most part. Very much an idea-based story, but you do have all these Bobs, the Bobaverse, that you are thrown into as well. So there's some good character stuff as well, but again, kind of middle of the road for me. We also started the Stephen King book club in October with Under the Dome. This is a chunky one, and it was one of the remaining like super popular Stephen King books that I have left to get to. There's a handful of others, but this one was one I've been meaning to read for a long time. Unfortunately, I wasn't crazy about this book. I thought it was fine. Another 3.5 star from me from King. And with this, it actually isn't the ending that didn't work for me, because I know for a lot of people the ending just ruins it. I didn't mind the ending, and I actually kind of liked it. It was really like this middle portion just should have been cut. Like, this would have made a fantastic 350, maybe 400 page book, but instead it is over 1,000 pages. So King just needs an editor. He really does. Like, this should have been shorter. So unfortunately, it wasn't crazy about that. And there were a few characters I latched onto, but overall, I wasn't crazy about this cast of characters either. So as far as like Stephen King's like long epic books, this is probably my least favorite that I've read. But it's still pretty good, and I'm really pleased that so many people read it and enjoyed it for the book club. Quick plug on that as well. We will be reading The Shining in November and then Dr. Sleep in December. If you want to join us, again, the link to the Discord is down below. Next up, I read Court of Assassins by Philip C. Quaintrell. I believe that's how you say his last name. This is the first book in the Ranger Archive trilogy, which is a prequel trilogy to his much longer series, The Echo Saga, which I believe is 9 books. There was a big sale called The Day of the Dragon that happened at the very beginning of October, in which all of his books were on sale for like 99 cents each, and so I picked up all of the ones I didn't already own, and I decided to start with the Ranger Archive trilogy, and I'm glad that I did. I feel like this was a really great introduction to one of the main characters, Azure, and I really, really enjoyed this. This is kind of assassin fantasy, but that's kind of part of it, and it's really about his exit from this assassin's guild that he grew up in, and the things that lead ultimately to where he ends up at the start of the Echo Saga. Like I said, I had a really good time with this. I really enjoyed the main character a lot. And I really like the world that's being developed here. I'm really glad that I started off with this, and I do plan on completing this trilogy this year so I can jump into the Echo Saga in 2025. If you have not read any Philip C. Quaintrell, I do recommend starting with this, or you can jump into the Echo Saga. That's what a lot of people recommend, but personally for me, given that this takes place kind of leading into the Echo Saga, I wanted to just kind of experience it chronologically. So very excited about continuing this trilogy. I highly recommend. And then I did end up squeezing in Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I am now fully caught up on the Stormlight Archive, which is terrifying to me because that means I only have one book left until I have to wait like 10 years probably for the next one. Oh, it makes me sad. But Rhythm of War, really enjoyed this book. I know for a lot of people this is their least favorite Stormlight Archive book. That's not the case for me. It's not my favorite, but it is not my least favorite as well. I'll probably do an official ranking at some point, but just know it's kind of controversial. But Rhythm of War was great. I think the plot itself is probably the least compelling, which I get why some people don't enjoy it as much because of that. But I really enjoyed the plot, and I loved the world building that we got here, as well as kind of digging into the magic system a little bit more. And additionally, the emotional beats from the story were on another level. Really fantastic. Love the way that Brandon Sanderson tackles a lot of mental health stuff in this book, in the series overall as well, but this book was very much focused on mental health, and I just love it. I love it. I'm so excited for Wind and Truth. Cannot wait. Then I read another Sherry Lapina book, that being The Couple Next Door. This is her most popular book and the one that I've had on my radar for the longest. I liked this book. I didn't love this book. Overall, I think as a story as a whole, I enjoyed What Have You Done more, but the ending of this one was better. So kind of opposite. I enjoyed the journey more with What Have You Done, but the ending less. And with The Couple Next Door, I enjoyed the journey less, but the ending more. So that made sense, I think. Yeah, The Couple Next Door follows a couple that go next door for a party or like a dinner with their neighbors. I think it's like a duplex situation, I believe. And they leave their baby at home with a monitor on so they can hear, but the reason they do that is because their babysitter canceled and they're right next door, so they think it's gonna be fine. But then they come home at like 1 a.m. from the dinner and their baby is gone, has been kidnapped. So it's an unraveling of what happened, who is to blame, what does the media think about the parents, what do the parents think about the parents, who can you trust, who can you not trust, what's really going on here. Unfortunately, I predicted most of what happened in this book, but the very, very end was excellent. Risky, but paid off. I really enjoyed the ending. Book as a whole, it was okay. Probably like a 3-star to 3.5-star for me. Next, I did read books 1 and 2 of the Beyond the Lost Coast series by Andrew Van Wey. Book 1 being By the Light of Dead Stars, and book 2 being Tides of Darkness. Now, By the Light of Dead Stars was a reread for me. I did read it last year, but Tides of Darkness just came out, and so I decided to do a reread of book 1, and I loved these books. These were fantastic. Some of my favorite reads of the month. Really some of my favorite reads of the year. This is great cosmic horror, but it's centered upon a really fantastic group of characters, particularly the two main characters, Zelda, who is, I want to say she's like 15 years old, and her uncle Mark, who is now her caretaker after her parents are tragically killed at the very beginning of book 1. They move to this town, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this town. I'm not going to tell you what, but it's pretty crazy. I thought book 2 was even better than book 1, a great step up, and I am so excited for book 3, which Andrew Van Wey is currently working on, so perfect time to read this trilogy. Or series, I don't know what it's gonna be. Next, I did continue the Nightmare Land Chronicles by Daniel Barnett with book 2, which is Lullaby. This is a very short novella. It's about 95 pages, I wanna say, but I really enjoyed this. This is the continuation of his 6-book series, Nightmare Land Chronicles, which I think it's actually gonna be more, but currently it's 6 books. And it's a post-apocalyptic horror story about the world that has gone dark. The sun has disappeared, basically, and things go from there. But this book went in a lot of directions I didn't anticipate. There's more going on here that I'm very excited to unravel in future books. They are short, snappy, and really good, so I highly recommend The Nightmare Land Chronicles by Daniel Barnett. Next up, I did read 2 books that I was sent for review by Saga Press. The first of those being The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Keist. I'm not 100% sure how to say the last name. But this is a really interesting haunting story. Essentially, we follow a character who lived in a neighborhood that is now a haunted neighborhood, and the whole world knows it. It exists, but nobody can go in there because if they do, they come out and they are different. We'll leave it at that. But essentially, the main character is asked to go back home, and because she is from there, she's one of the only people who can safely go back, quote unquote safely, go back to this neighborhood. And so she agrees to, despite her cautious nature toward the place, and as she does that, she has to confront the ghosts of her past, as well as some strained relationships that she abandoned after everything that happened. Overall, I enjoyed this book. I liked the idea of it. I think it's a very unique take on a ghost story. There were a couple issues I had with some character dynamics as well as some decision making, but I did enjoy quite a bit of this story. So if this sounds interesting to you, go ahead and check it out. And the other one that I read from Saga Press was I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. I really enjoyed this. This is probably my favorite by this author at this time. I think I've read 4 or 5 of his books, and this one's my favorite. We follow a teenager, or really it's him as an adult reflecting on his time as a teenage slasher. And I want to say that it's set in the 80s. That's when the teenage portion is. So this is a great horror story that pays tribute to like 80s horror and tropes and stereotypes, but definitely does a bit of inverting of those tropes. It perfectly balances that, like that paying tribute but subverting expectations. And I loved the way that the story played out. I was totally caught off guard by some of the things that happened in this book, and I really, really enjoyed it. So if you like horror and you like books that kind of subvert your expectations, check this book out. It was really, really good. Next, I did read Cop Hater by Ed McBain. This is the first book in the 47th Precinct. 87th Precinct novels. There's like 50 of these, but I decided to go ahead and pick this up because Ollie over at Criminale Books loves Ed McBain, and I've been watching him talk about this series for ages, and so I finally picked this one up. It was exactly what I wanted, a pulpy police procedural book where it's not so much focused on the individual characters as much as it is the mystery and the pace. So short, really easy to get into, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I'll definitely be continuing with the 87th Precinct books. Like I said, there's like 50 of them, and they're so short and easy to get into. So I feel like this is going to be the next series for me that's like my slump breaker. When I just cannot get into anything, I'll pick up an 87th Precinct book and be good to go. So thank you again to Ollie for this recommendation. I'll leave a link to his channel down below. Definitely check it out. He's a much bigger channel than me, so if you like my stuff, you'll probably like his stuff. Next up, I read The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. I believe that's the author's name, yes. I read this for Jake and Stacey Choose My TBR Round 3, which is fantasy and sci-fi edition. So I'm not going to tell you any of my thoughts on this because we'll have a wrap-up for that later on, but I read it. I also read M is for Magic, a short story collection from Neil Gaiman. No thoughts on this one either. And lastly, I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I actually really enjoyed this book. I know that overall it's a bit divisive amongst Grady Hendrix fans, but for me, it's probably my second favorite Grady Hendrix book thus far. Although I think I vary from the populace as far as like my favorite Grady Hendrix books, because I've read, I want to say 5 now, and my 2 favorites are probably The Final Girl Support Group and How to Sell a Haunted House, which are not most people's favorites, but that's fine. I really enjoyed this book quite a bit. Not only is it a haunted house type situation, it's also a paranormal, like, possession story almost. I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but just go into this book. Be ready for some complicated family relationships and some creepy stuff going on. I wasn't scared, but I was definitely unnerved at times. I really enjoyed this. Okay, so those are the 19 books that I read in the month of October. If I had to pick a favorite book, it would probably be Rhythm of War. How could it not be? But if I wanted to pick something else to be my favorite, it would probably be the Tides of Darkness by Andrew Van Wey. So go ahead and check those out. It's been a great spooky season. I've read so many horror and mystery thriller books. I'm definitely going to be changing pace a little bit, though, getting back to some more fantasy and literary fiction in the coming months, because I am a little bit burnt out on horror. But that's fine. I had a great season. Like I said, let me know in the comments what your favorite book of October was, and thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I'll be back with another video soon, and I will see you then. Bye!